I'm going to get that right one of these days. So, hello and welcome to the Bungalows for Bachelors. God damn. Late night learning. Today, I'm going to be speaking through a little bit of a recovering throat from some sickness. But the good news is I have my water. So, all you have to do is drink a little bit of water. And just like that. Sometimes you just got to drink a little bit of water, guys, and that'll fix everything. So, but if you've been working really hard all day, you got to drink your electrolytes, especially if you've been framing, y'all bungalow bachelors. So, I would first like to welcome Mr. Will Stevenson for liking the video. He says, like the video. You are right, guys. You ought to like the video because that helps me out and it helps you out because it encourages yourself to appreciate good things, I guess. And you should always drink more water. That's certainly true. So, spend the whole stream drinking water and not talking. Yes. That's the tampon right there. So, why are we here, gentlemen? Well, we are here to observe. Welcome also the Green Observer to the chats. And we are gentlemen here as well. That is correct. I appreciate y'all for watching. So, I kind of hooked you guys. I hooked you guys with that clickbaity title. Straps anyone, right? Because it's kind of like, ooh, family friendly show here. Straps, right? But we are not here to discuss those kinds of straps. We're actually here to discuss mostly beams and ceiling joists. But if I named it beams and ceiling joists, then no one would be here. That's not true. Y'all are great. Also, welcome to the chat, Tam. Thank you. Thank you for the fire emoji, Tam. All righty. So let's get into this. So we're going to talk about beams and ceiling joists. Straps are related. First of all, this is a red pen. It won't work very well on my whiteboard, so I ought to switch to one of the markers for the whiteboard. That would work better. Okay, so beams and ceiling joists. So why are beams important? Because generally speaking, people throw their ceiling joists across the ceiling, right? And if you've never seen an attic, what your flat ceiling is actually is a bunch of wood things that are running along your ceiling, and they sit on one wall and they sit on the other wall, and that holds your ceiling up, right? So when you have walls that are farther apart, the ceiling joists have to be taller and bigger and heavier or closer together, right? More strength to span a greater distance. So frequently what we do, instead of just using larger and larger and larger ceiling joists, we use a beam that's parallel with the walls in the center of the span. So that should not block my face with the fan. In the center of the span, so that we can reduce the work that the ceiling joists are doing. And why do we do that? Well, generally, if you buy a beam and install it, you're going to be paying a little bit less money for material than if all of the ceiling joists are bigger and more expensive. So that is why we do that. So that being the topic, beams and ceiling joists, how are straps related? Well, straps are just one of the many tools that the world used to use. Yeah. Before we moved on to bigger and better things. So a little bit of the backstory, a little bit of the history here. Back in the day, people would build walls. Here's a wall. Here's a wall. They got to be the same height usually. That'd be good. And the ceiling joists that are straight go across the wall. Yeah. And back in the day, they would just take some 2x4s, run them from wall to wall, about 24 inches on center, right? And then everything was good. Everything was happy. It doesn't matter if these were 5 feet apart. Doesn't matter if they're 20 feet apart. They would just do it, and that was cool. And then what they figured out happened, 20, 30 years later. is that the ceiling joists were sagging like crazy because they weren't strong enough to hold the weight over time. Remember, wood is a time dependent material. The longer wood holds the load, the worse off it will be. So people don't do that anymore. That's bad juju. So what happened? Well, they're like, well, we ought to not let that happen. So I guess we'll like put something above them, right? So what they used to do next was they would use maybe a 4x6 or a bigger chunk of wood. Of course, they weren't, no one was doing calculations and stuff like that. They were like, well, let's take a bigger piece of wood and just make it like go in the middle and then like hold them all up, right? So what we're going to be talking about here is like the strapping. So the reason I bring up the old days is because the detail of how this beam cross section used to hold up the ceiling joists that are running across the wall was they would just take the same kind of strapping that you would use to like, not that this may be super helpful, but like they're like metal coil strapping, right? So if you need to like hold up a pipe or something plumbing related, and you need to like connect to something and you got some wood above you, then you can nail part of the strap to the wood above you, run the strap underneath the thing and then back up to the wood and then nail one of those holes down somewhere else, right? So it's just a little thin gauge metal strap. So what they would do is they would nail it on up here and the strap in a different color because that would be easier to see. The strap would come down, it would belly underneath the joist, it'd go back up the other end of the beam, and then they would nail it back on. And they just started doing that. And that was just kind of like, okay, this is a cool way of holding some stuff up, right? Were these strap metal gauges rated for the weight that was supposed to be put there? No, there was just a thing people had at the time and it solved a problem. So frequently that is what a lot of house building was, there's a bunch of like craftsmen really. I mean, there was no like framers and then masons and then builders and then sheetrockers. There's just guys that knew how to build houses, putting houses together, right? And they learned from guys in the past and they solved problems on their own. So that's why that's the way it is. Well, the way it was. So what changed then? Well, building materials changed, building styles changed. The introduction of engineered lumber, basically us being able to take little pieces of wood, glue them together and make really, really big pieces of wood, big beams, big stuff like that, as well as the changing home style of like architecturally speaking of like rooms and like, oh, we want big rooms, we want big living rooms, we want big tall ceilings. Oh, I want my big living room to be connected to my big kitchen with no walls in between. I don't like walls. Get rid of the walls, right? Open spaces, all these open spaces, excuse me, kept pushing the materials companies to come out with solutions for this like ceiling joists can't go very far problem, right? And the answer was just more bigger beams and explaining. Oh, so, wow, that was weird. Can we just read these chats because I just had a little like brain thing here. Um, Tam Tam, I'm gonna get so smart, guys, with all this construction knowledge. Thank you, Tam Tam. I hope so. That is why I'm here, is to educate. And Will says 1000%. Tam Tam again, you're excellent at explaining things. Sam, keep up the fantastic work. This information is incredibly interesting and valuable. I appreciate that, Tam Tam. I don't know if you're somebody who comes from a construction background, but I'm hoping to make this material engaging for people who may not know much. So, bigger beams, bigger things going on, bigger spans, and honestly, the way like governments work and all is more interference from jurisdictions, right? Your city, your county. There's now structural inspections. There's now all this extra stuff going on. Home banks lending huge amounts of money for new homes that are going to get built need to be reassured that the building is not going to fall down. So there needs to be all these steps in place to like make sure everything's good, right? So all of these things combining had this big push on the industry to come up with better hardware, better solutions, more reliable solutions, faster solutions, lighter weight solutions, you name it, right? And so was born one of the companies, Simpson Strong Tie. And Simpson Strong Tie is one of the big companies that makes tons of hardware. And when I say hardware, typically what we're referring to is most of the houses used to be built with wood of some kind and nails. That was it. Hardware basically means steel. We're now going to have steel plates, steel straps, steel tie downs, steel anchors, steel whatever, right? All these extra things now exist to make houses safer, built faster, sort of, and stronger, right? So, all that to say, the hardware was created to change the way we were framing houses. Now, before, let's see, there was a little bit of a shift between the old stuff where they're just using pipe strapping and whatever they could find to hay bale wire and stuff. They would hold a beam up with different kinds of, oh, let's draw the ceiling joist down here. Oh boy. So they would hold this connection up in a bunch of different ways. One of the ways they figured out, and I saw this in a house from the 50s, was again, like I said, they tried to use wood for kind of everything. So what they figured out was, oh, wood is pretty strong in tension. Like you can pull on it pretty hard, right? So we don't necessarily need a metal strap to go underneath this ceiling joist and belly it. We could just take a 2x4, nail it to the beam, let it hang down to the ceiling joist, and then nail it to the ceiling joist too. And like that'll hold it up. It's just a wood strap, right? So I started doing that, and that's decently effective. We'll talk a little bit later about like beam positioning and how that affects things, but you know, that was a pretty good solution. But the big one that changed everything, wow, was the excuse me, was the joist hanger. Yes, the joist hanger. The joist hanger is steel plate, very pretty thin, and it's been bent into a shape from the front. It looks like this, something like that, right? And it's designed to get nailed to a header, which is the member carrying the joist. And then the joist material thing sits in here like this in a little pocket. And then there's another nailing slot for, toe nailing into it so that things can't move around, right? So that's the joist hanger. Now, why did the joist hanger create such an impact? And before actually I get really too far into that, I'm going to talk about one more method that was right between the joist hanger and the wood strap thing. People decided that they could also cross section of the close up here. They could also create this beam ceiling connection by pushing the beam down flush with the bottom of the ceiling joist, not just above them. So you could actually break the ceiling joist. Now, that was a particular, there goes the headset. That was a particular issue for a little bit because when houses were built in the 40s to 60s, things were very simple. I mean, you were basically building houses that were rectangles with a gable end on each end, and just the roof goes down. That's it. Super simple, right? If you drive down like old neighborhoods downtown and areas like that, you will see houses like that. Maybe there's like an L-shaped house with one sticking out the front, maybe. But because that's how they were building those houses, they were built in a way that required the ceiling joists to be connected to each other in the middle so that basically tension could be transferred across them. So when houses started to get geometrically more complicated, that like yes, correct, Daniel. Back before they invented power tools, correct. Yes, power tools help us do things much faster and more complicated. Excellent point. Wait, no, that was the bright green observer, not the green observer. Sorry, sorry about that, Daniel. Um, don't mean to dox you here. Okay, so that was a problem, but people had to figure out how to do without it. And so there is a way where you could use a different kind of metal strap, and you could actually strap this one underneath all the way across to this one, nail them together, and you've reintroduced that tension connection, and you could pull on those. But we don't really care too much about that. What we care about is that people started pushing the beams down into the ceiling joists, and they started using what's called a pressure block. And the pressure block is supposed to be a quick and easy way to get this thing to happen where the ceiling joists are held up and everybody's happy. Okay. The pressure block would go right in here, cross section, and its job would be to hold up two ceiling joists. So, top down view, I'll show you what that would look like so you can hopefully understand a little better. Top down view, beam is going this way. You've got two ceiling joists right here. This block, excuse me, is going to go between these two. And you're not going to put one between every ceiling joist because you only need one to hold two, because the way they're connected is you would just put the block in, nail the block to the beam so it's not going anywhere, and then you would nail through the joist into the block. Now, why not just if you've got a ceiling joist hanging here, why don't you just toenail it in and just rely on that? Well, that's because that's a terrible idea, and that's why people don't do that. But you can, and you could face nail this way, and that's much better. So that's what the pressure block was for. It solved a good problem, and it's still used today because it's a good solution. There's nothing wrong with it. And depending on the prices of wood and the prices of steel, it's potentially a cheaper, faster solution. Sometimes it's just faster to cut a block. You've already got all the wood on site, throw it in there. You don't have to worry about ordering. Oh, we're short on. That's a great question. Well, I'm going to answer that in a second. The question is, why is it a terrible idea to toenail beams? And I'll explain why that connection is a bad idea in just a second. But yeah, pressure blocks, they're good. You don't have to worry about I ran out of hangers. Now I got to go get more hangers. No, you got pressure blocks. You're fine. Okay. So now the last one was the joist hanger, right? So the joist hanger is super simple. You make all your layout marks on the beam. You take your joist hangers, you set it there, you nail it onto the beam, and now there's this nice little metal pocket for this wood thing to come in here and sit on. And the wood thing is going to get nailed to it. It's super sturdy. And there's a nice 1.5-inch-ish area of bearing so that should these nails not hold this together super well, the ceiling joist is still sitting on something, right? It's not going to slip through or whatever, which is the problem with the toenailing that I'm going to tell you about. Okay. So if we were to attempt to, excuse me, the beam just got wider. If we were to attempt to toenail this, what's going to happen is the toenail, let's do a little top-down view up here. Okay, so the toenail is going to go in at an angle like that. Now, problems with toenails are that usually you're going to use a 3-inch nail, maybe a 3 1/4, and maybe a 3 1/2 if you're really shooting or using really big nails, but most time probably a 3-inch nail, right? So you don't have more than 1.5 inches of penetration into your beam, and you've got probably less than that because you're shooting at an angle. Now, problems are you don't have very much penetration. When you're shooting a toenail physically with the gun, it's not always the easiest thing to get the gun to not move when you shoot it, and to get the nail to go in just the right angle, and to get the nail to not split off part of the wood, right? Because you got this tiny little piece of wood hanging on here, And if your nail is too close to the edge, you're just going to split the wood over. And as soon as you split it, it's not connected to the rest of the wood anymore. So it's why no point in the nail being there. So top down view, that's what's going on. And of course, you put one in from this direction too. So it's not a terrible connection in that, like, it's not going to kill anyone. But problems are that the toenails don't go in right. That's a big risk and a frequent thing that happens. And the next thing is that when you, um, let's do this side. This side's the pressure block, and the other side's the toenail. So here's the difference. On the pressure block, you face nailed straight into this beam, the pressure block, right? So there's a perfect shear connection. Your members are perpendicular to the nail. Shear. Now, when the gravity tries to pull the ceiling joist down, which it will, there's a 90-degree angle there, right? So that's ideal. That's what you want. When you toenail, you are sacrificing, like, technically from this perspective, the nail's probably still going in this way, right? But the nail is going to appear shorter from this view because the nail is at an angle and you're not gaining as much depth because you're not going straight into it. So you lose the depth, and toenails in general, like I said, are unlikely to be connected well. So that's why it's a problem. The other reason that's a bad idea is because when you're doing the pressure block like this, you can put a ton of nails in this thing if you wanted to, but you're probably going to put maybe like, I don't know, 6, something like that, right? A lot of nails. And each nail is probably getting you about 200 pounds of shears, right? So if you put in 6 nails, then this is a 1,200 pound resistant connection. And that's a lot of weight. Ceiling joists aren't going to be that heavy. When you nail the ceiling joist into the block, you're probably going to use 3 nails, most likely, if it's a 2x6, right? So there's 600 pounds of shear right there. So you're gaining that full shear value because you're nailing straight into the wood. You're not doing angled stuff. So you have just better security. When you do this, you're losing some of that shear value. And I mean, I guess you could do 3 nails on each side, toenailed, and then you would get 6 nails, which would give you 1,200 pounds. But now what you're doing is you're shooting 6 nails into the end of one piece of wood, which might affect the strength of the wood, right? And it might cause problems. So that's the not short answer for why toenailing. Got to be careful. Make sure I didn't miss anything here. Okay. Let's see. Yes, I've been bamboozled. Yeah, what happened was I was speaking, and then I read the chat and glanced at it at the same time, and one of the words that I was reading came out of my mouth, and it was confusing. Bright Green Observer says his name actually is Daniel. That's confusing because I don't know who's Daniel now. The one yellow observer says an ingrown nail. That is correct. All this damn gravity pulling on stuff. That's true. If we lived on the moon or a planet with lesser gravity, I bet toenailing would be just fine. In fact, you know what? Shame on my memory here, but I don't remember if I'm pretty sure Mars is smaller than the Earth, but I could be wrong. In fact, I usually am. So if Mars is a good place, maybe you should bring it up to Elon Musk and let him know, hey, when you get there and you ship your lumber to Mars, because that's what they would build with, they would use toenails, and you can let Elon Musk know that. We got Zenith in the chat. Welcome, Mr. Zenith, to the show. Okay, Bernard. Yes, thank you. Daniel says Mars is about 1/3 Earth gravity. That sounds right. Thank you, Green Observer, for verifying that. You are a man of many space science knowledges. I like it. All right, good deal. So we talked about how the stuff, the history, how things came to be, how we do things now, right? So why did we make some of those changes? Again, the push of the industry, the safety, the construction methods. Now, I am a personal not fan of installing 100 hangers because that's a lot of nails. And they make hanger nail guns But hangers are very tedious to install versus like working with wood. It's like, okay, I know what I'm working with. I'm working with wood. It's not complicated. So, personally, not a huge fan of hangers, but they do fantastic things. And when you need big hangers, like not just little ceiling joist hangers, but like big hangers, the ones that hold like 8,000, 10,000, 15, 20,000 pound hangers, those are cool. Those are cool. Don't want to mess those up. Ah. So, the last thing I'm going to talk about here is your favorite topic, and that's diaphragms. Remember? So, from the other stream I did where I talked about diaphragms, I said, what is a diaphragm? The diaphragm are basically like the floor surface, the ceiling surface, or the roof surface. Excuse me. Those are the diaphragms. Zenith, this is the voice that you have to look forward to on our podcast. Also, you guys in the chat, if you aren't watching the podcast, Will, if you're a mod, drop the link for the podcast in the YouTube chat. And if you're not, then don't, because it won't work. But you can maybe add some detail that would help people find it. So, train of thought. Diaphragms, right. So, why would the diaphragms matter? Well, we're talking about ceilings. Okay, a ceiling is a diaphragm. Now, remember when I talked earlier about like how the positioning of this beam matters relative to your ceiling joist? I said that because your ceiling joists are your diaphragm. You're going to nail sheetrock to them, and then it's going to create a big rigid structure that's acting like a diaphragm. And your beams and how they interact with your ceiling joists can affect that diaphragm in good ways or bad ways, or well, in good ways or just we don't care ways, right? So if we do this and the beam is way up above the ceiling or just a little bit above the ceiling, either way, and we got strap of some kind holding it on, then all the beam is doing is it's floating up here by itself and it's holding the weight from these ceiling joists. That's it. Now, if we take the beam and we push it down into the ceiling, I draw the beam and ceiling different every time. Now the beam becomes part of our ceiling diaphragm. And why is that potentially cool? That is potentially cool because now the ends of the beam are going to get nailed. They're screwed down to the walls as well. And all the ceiling joists are connected to it. So what it's doing is it's acting like a collector of forces. And it's just one more thing in the house connecting walls together and making things more rigid. Right? So remember what I talked about before, how a typical room layout, top-down view is going to be like this. Okay, there's your room. You picked a side. This is the short side, so that's the side we'd want to run the ceiling joists on, unless there's some other extraneous reason. That's probably not the right word. Definitely not the right word. Okay, there's the ceiling joist. They hold the ceiling. So if somebody were to push on these walls, there's not really, like, if there's no sheetrock, there's nothing really keeping the walls from moving. Nothing really rigid. They're just kind of there and they're kind of bendy. Once this is sheetrocked and the sheetrock's connected to the blocking on these walls, then it becomes rigid. But before that, it's not. And it's just sheetrock, let's be honest. And that's not the strongest thing in the world. However, what if I got a surprise for you guys? We're going to use red. What if we took a beam and we put it there? And it was attached to that wall, and it was attached to that wall. Now, these walls are rigid because they got ceiling joists connected, and these walls are rigid because they got the beam connected, and the beam's in plane with ceiling. You just like everything's stronger and better, right? So that is why the diaphragms matter. So typically, you can get some different attributes from beams and ceiling joists depending on where they are related elevationally to each other. And of course, there is like the other way that's like super old fashioned where it's like, okay, we got a wall and we got a wall. And people talk like this back in the day because they were dumber, right? And the ceiling joists go across the wall and we want to hold them up with something. And then we'll take the beam, we'll put it here underneath, and we'll put a post under it. Nobody likes seeing posts these days. So it's like, we don't see this. But that was a way to do it too. You just put it underneath. And of course, if you put it underneath, you don't pretty much do anything except maybe like toenail it down so it doesn't move. So yeah, that is the straps theory on beams, ceiling joists, and the like. Let me catch up here on chat. Oh, Zenith says, LOL, somebody get this man a Ricola before the next stream. Oh, you must have meant ricotta. I do like ricotta cheese. I'm just playing with you. Hangers, big hangers. You are right, Zenith. Big hangers are the way to go. Looks like Will can post the link in the chat. Podcast starting in an hour, guest starring at Zenith. Excellent. You guys should watch. It's going to be interesting. One yellow observer, Ricola. That's a noodle. Oh, jeez. Like manicotti, rigatolo. I heard the other day from a book that you're not supposed to eat pasta. It's not healthy for you. It's not natural. But I like pasta. Will says, what an excellent beam. Daniel says, what would be the future of straps? Where does it evolve from here? Wow, an actual question. I like it. I like it, Green Observer. What would be the future of straps and where does it evolve from here? Okay, so houses are moving currently in the direction of large open spaces. They are not at any point probably ever going to go back to, we build a house and it's got these walls and these rooms are all these little rooms and these are the rooms and they're all little and that's where we build houses. They're pretty much always going to be sticking with, hey, we have a house. There's some big central area and some like dining and kitchen space shared. And then there's like a master thing over here and those are kids on that side. Pretty much the modern house for you right there. Just like that. So that's pretty much how things are probably going to keep going with some variation on that, of course. Different size rooms, different purpose rooms, stuff like that. To answer your question, the future of straps is in strengthening like special areas of the house that we just like have been ignoring for a long time. That shows up a lot in that big center room. And it's honestly not for the reason you would think. It's not really about ceilings. It's really about walls. And what's happening is I have inspected so many houses as a framing engineer where I saw the way they had selected and cut the studs and put stuff together. And I'm like, when the wind blows on it, it's going to like, there's no straps. There's nothing on there. So you got to fix that. So I say when the wind blows, when 110 mile an hour wind blows on it. Okay. So if frequently what you're going to see is big, tall walls. I can make a video. I could talk about tall walls all day long, right? So tall walls are sails. They are a sail for the wind. They want to catch the wind and they want to push the house over with it. And they want to bend in like a sail would bend in. That's what tall walls are trying to do, right? So naturally, when we have a house, here's our floor plan over here. Here's our big room in the house, right? Here's our master side of the house. This is our big room. The big room has this nice back porch right here. And because there's a nice back porch, we want to let in lots of light. We're going to put massive, huge glass windows in this wall. That way there's no structural integrity left in the wall, but we can get a great view. Oh, and let's try this new 16-foot patio door thing where we basically like remove all the wood in the wall and we do that. That would be a sweet wall. Oh, the natural light. I can feel the energy from the sun being absorbed right now, even though it's dark. Okay. It looks like a monster and it is a monster, because this is a nightmare for any structural engineer to build this wall. Okay. And here's what happens if you do this. There are now only 4 places in the wall that are going to do the work of holding all of the wind load from this wall. The ends are 1 because they're always full height, unless the framers have cut them mid height somewhere, which happens when other walls intersect sometimes, and they will cut them. And next to the door. Those are the only 2 places in this whole wall that are going to hold all of the wind load pushed against this thing. And these wind loads can like generate 20, 30 pounds per square foot of like pushing on this area of pressure, right? That's a lot. Now, these studs in here are good and long, but they terminate right here, which means all of the weight they're catching right here is still not down to the foundation. It's got to be transmitted to this horizontal member, which will transmit to this member, which will go back down to the foundation. So tall walls are a problem. Why am I drawing this? Because metal straps solve a lot of the issues that happen here. Very frequently, we will need metal straps at joints like right here, right here, right here, right here, above the headers, because a lot of times that's where the studs are going to get cut to make room for holding the weight of the headers. So, I mean, I could put straps all over this thing. But I would say that's the future. There's just a lot of lateral bracing stuff nowadays where we're trying to keep all this stuff from falling apart. I don't know why people don't want their houses to fall apart. It's kind of silly to me, but hey. Oh, I left that chat up question the whole time. Great. Will says I can indeed. I don't know what I said. That's okay. Blue Dot says pasta la vista, baby. Terminator Tellini. Terminator. Oh, Terminator Tellini. That was his last name. Tellini. Terminator Tellini. All right, gentlemen. That's what I got for you this evening. That's how beams and ceiling joists interact with each other and the history behind them. Hope y'all have enjoyed, especially the intro part where I forgot to put on the video for the countdown, and you instead just got to watch me stare at the screen and pretend like I wasn't being looked at. I will see you guys next week, and I don't know what the topic is yet, so you'll have to just wait and see. But maybe catch us on this podcast coming up, and hopefully Zenith can do all the talking, and me not very much. So I will catch you gentlemen later. Thank you for watching.